Today I am doing a hoist review on this 2025 BMW G20 M340i xDrive. This is an LCI2 model, and it was one of the first 2025 LCI2 deliveries in the United States. The focus of the video will be on the hoist review. However, I will do breakout videos on the order and delivery process, as well as the modifications planned for this vehicle. Those will be separate. Now, the vehicle itself is fully loaded. It has every option available, and it is in Arctic Race Blue Metallic. It has a black leather interior with blue stitching. It also has the new 995 style wheels, which are bicolor, as well as the red Brembo sourced brake calipers. Just a note on the wheels, those are also available in all black. However, you cannot get the all black wheels with the high performance cooling and offset summer tire package. Moving on, the vehicle was delivered at 200 miles distance from my home, and it was driven in heavy rain, which seems to happen every time I take delivery of a vehicle. Nevertheless, it is dirty. The vehicle is being prepared for paint correction, as well as decontamination for PPF, as well as ceramic coatings on the wheels and on the body and on the glass. There's a lot of work that's going to occur on this vehicle in a short amount of time. Again, the focus is a hoist review and to go under the vehicle and show all of the mechanicals. On the first pass, I'll show with the covers on, and then I'll go and remove all the covers and expose all the mechanicals, and we'll get into it straight away. Let's go. We will begin the hoist review at the rear of the vehicle and move our way forward. First topic of discussion are the exhaust tips. This is a detached exhaust tip design. That is to say, the exhaust pipe is not connected to the exhaust tip, and the tip is connected to the body via two metal brackets, one on either side. That's the arrangement. Now, the tip design is not something that I'm a fan of, and I first saw this design, or one like it, in the 2008 to 2014 Lexus ISF. For those of you that may remember, there were offset exhaust tips on that vehicle, and the exhaust pipes were nowhere even near the tips. They were just pointed in the general direction. I'm sure someone at Lexus thought that was a great idea. I'm guessing that they are somewhere today designing toilet seats or something similar, because that design crashed and burned. However, it gave other manufacturers bad ideas. That is to see what we have today. I would much rather see this vehicle have the exhaust tips that came on the E90 335i. However, those are now reserved for the 330i and the current G20 chassis. On this vehicle, we get this kind of in between. We don't get dual tips like on the M3 M4. I understand that, but we're stuck with this in between separated kind of luxury looking exhaust tip that you find on the 5 series as well as the 7 series. I just don't like the way this looks and the way it's been implemented. It's not the worst I've ever seen, but again, I would prefer the pure dual tips or a single tip or something that was more becoming of the vehicle. Let's talk about, let's see, over on this side, we've got the valve and this little clip right here. Yeah, that's a great point of failure later in the life of the vehicle. After it's been through hundreds of to thousands of heat cycles, that clip will fail. It'll start to allow the valve to rattle. So this is the valve actuator, the valve's inside the pipe, and it'll loosen. And when you start the vehicle, it will sound like bolts in a coffee can, or something of that nature, maybe an old moped exhaust or something. But You have to replace that. Replacing it's a little bit difficult because this actuator actually travels further than the flap will travel. To replace this clip, you need to put this in an in-between state, and it's hard to do that. But I've done it on the F30. It was no fun, and I'm not seeing a valve over on this side, so it must be just on that one side of the vehicle. Now that's the hanger right there. Let's now look at the underside of the vehicle from a proper perspective. First of all, the exhaust. This is the stock exhaust that comes with the M340i. This is not the MPE or M Performance exhaust that's available in the BMW Performance catalog. I know many people are purchasing that exhaust. It is $2,700 retail, and I will tell you that the tubes, the pipes you're seeing are identical on both of these systems. The only difference on the M Performance exhaust is the muffler. The muffler is a little bit less restrictive. It's a little bit louder. If you like that, that's great. I don't need more sound. I have plenty of sound right here. When this vehicle is started at 5 or 5:30 a.m. in the morning, should I be leaving for an automotive event such as HPDE or a driving tour or IMSA race or whatever, it wakes up everyone in the house. It wakes up my neighbors. There's dogs barking. Yeah, I don't really want that in an everyday daily driver, which is what the M340i is to me. If I wanted that, I would have it, but I don't want it. But again, whether you get M Performance exhaust or you stick with the factory standard exhaust as we're looking at, the pipes are exactly the same. For those of you purchasing the M Performance exhaust system after the fact, that is to say the vehicle was not delivered with that system already installed. And by the way, those systems are installed at the BMW VPC at each respective port prior to shipment to the dealer. It's not a dealer installed option, it's actually installed at the vehicle processing center. For those that are purchasing after the fact, you will be cutting into the existing exhaust at these dimples. And the M Performance exhaust system consists of essentially 4 feet of exhaust tubing and a different muffler. That is the contents of that system. Let's also address the elephant in the room. There were many people speculating that the 2025 LCI2 models in the United States market would have OPF filters, and they absolutely do not. That's 100% false. As we look the full length of the system, there are no OPF filters anywhere in this exhaust. This brace right here, this has been a common brace across the G20 platform, but in earlier models, this was actually bare metal. So in this case, it's painted. I don't know if it's probably steel based on what I can tell. But let's move forward and look at the rest of the exhaust briefly. So we've got an exhaust hanger right here. Sorry for the light being in the way. And then we have the downpipe itself. Pretty substantial downpipe, but yeah, that's the full exhaust. So it goes into a single, I wouldn't call it a dual pipe. It's more of a maybe 1.5 times the size of a normal pipe. And then as it gets back here, I haven't measured the diameter of these, but they're pretty substantial. They have a few bends and a few flat spots like right here to get over that brace, but nothing too scary or concerning. Okay, I had to take a moment and reposition the light and get myself situated. Now, let's talk about the rear diff. It's got an aluminum heat sink here in the back, and it has this sensor plug-in. The case itself is cast iron. And then on the left and the right, we have these aerodynamic shields. That's actually what they are. I call them gravel catchers because that's effectively what they do. The F90 M5. For some reason, they omitted these on that vehicle, and I added them after the fact because I do think they're helpful in terms of protecting the bottom of the vehicle, that is the suspension, from rocks and debris and things like that. The rear cradle is it's steel, And this is one area that I wish they would upgrade the 3 Series, right? The big difference between a 3 Series and a 5 Series, as well as if you're looking at Mercedes-Benz in the C and E class, but there's an asterisk next to that. The more expensive models, or the bigger models, such as this 5 Series, they have a hydroformed rear cradle, which is a masterful piece of artwork. It's incredible. And it's lighter, stronger than this unit here. It does a better job of absorbing road vibrations and things of that nature. I really wish they would get on with the program and make this an aluminum rear carrier. I also wish they would stop doing stamped steel control arms. This is one of the real bummers. If you go back in time, even the really, really old 3 Series, they didn't do this. They had solid either steel or aluminum control arms. None of this stamped steel. As what you're looking at here, much of it will be replaced in time. I'm going to get rid of all of this and go with proper suspension components, because this is not cool. This is not what they should be doing on these vehicles today. Next up this is a filler nozzle, or the filler return for the fuel tank. I removed one of these fuel tanks in an F30, a 328i xDrive. There's a video on my channel showing that, and the exhaust, these panels, the drive shaft, it all had to be dropped and lowered to get this out. I also did the rear parking brake repair in that video. I don't know if any of those items will be issues on this vehicle. I don't think they're having any more fuel tank issues, but I am kind of curious about the parking brake, how it's routed, how it's mounted, and if that's going to be a problem in the future. Surprisingly, we've got a couple of spots of rust here. I have never seen a BMW with rust on the bottom of it after delivery, and this vehicle is brand new. That was kind of surprising, but I'm going to spot these and make sure that they do not get any worse. Let's move forward here a little bit, and we're going to roll up to the transfer case. This is the transfer case brace. Transfer case looks much like the transfer case on the F30, and maybe a little bit like the one on the E90 as well. Nevertheless, it is serviceable. You effectively drop this arm down out of the way, and you support that, and then you need to drain the fluid out of it at some point in the future to make sure that it's being maintained properly. And I've done that many, many times. As far as the undercovers on this vehicle, this is just regular plastic. The sides are this fibrous material. It's all common. It's what they've been using for years. Under this cover, we have the ZF 8-speed transmission. Absolutely the best transmission on the market, bar none. It's the same transmission that's in this vehicle. However, these are, I'm sure, built differently from a durability perspective, but it's effectively the same case, just different internals. Okay, now let's take a look at something non-mechanical, namely the welcome lights, aka welcome light carpeting modules, which are located on the lower rocker moldings on both the driver and passenger sides. This is it here, and the LED is tucked away in that crevice. That provides what some people refer to as angel wings. I presume this will need to be cleaned periodically, otherwise it will lose its effectiveness, it'll dim, and it won't look as good. This replaces BMW's puddle lights, which are located on the lower interior trim of both the front and rear doors. I have the driver's door open here. We'll take a quick look, and you can see they still have the indention or the cutout. Get my finger in there, it's right there. So anyway, that is the situation. They've done away with the puddle lights. They've gone with this welcome light carpeting, and there is a lot of people up in arms about that. It's not that I think people dislike this, they just like the puddle lights more. And as we move forward, things get interesting. I'm going to get some more light positioned here. And the thing that has kind of surprised me is the choice in materials. Okay, first of all, this is your trapdoor for oil change. Nothing remarkable there. I'm not sure what these plastic shields are, but they're going to be removed in a short amount of time. We'll take a look at that. This is aluminum, steel, aluminum. And here's where it gets weird. If you look at this steel, it looks like gets galvanized. Now, on every prior BMW 3 Series that I've ever seen, F30, E90, E46, E36, this is always painted. This is effectively the subframe or the front cradle, if you will. It's what all the suspension components connect to. And I am just surprised that we have something here that looks like a chain link fence, effectively. Now, maybe it's strong, I assume it is, and it's corrosion resistant and all those things, but it is surprising to see this unpainted. The earlier G20s didn't have this. I know for a fact they didn't because I did a review, actually a pre-inspection review for a friend on an earlier 330i in the G20 line. Didn't have this. This has been a running change to this model, and I'm a bit concerned, but let's have a good look at our front wheels and the brakes and suspension. So I'll speak about this briefly. We've got a B on the back of the caliper that is Brembo. These are genuine Brembo brakes made for BMW by Brembo. And we've got our active suspension. So up top, McPherson strut. This is a 2-link setup, as with every other 3 Series that's been made in the last several generations. We have our link here for the sway bar. The sway bar does run above the subframe. If you need to change that someday, good luck. That's a really hard project. I've done it. This is lower control arm, tie rod, thrust arm, thrust bushing, aka hydro bearing, and of course the front axle. This is all pretty common stuff, and this is the way BMW has been doing things for quite some time. They did revise how the axle actually ties into the spindle. Thank goodness for that. It's so much easier to change out axles on the newer vehicles than on the old vehicles. It's just how the spline is designed. They've done a much better job with that. Again, I'll position the camera here just for a few seconds, pan around, and now we're going to roll over to the other side. Same situation, only difference is we do have that level sensor here at the bottom. My hands are full at the moment, otherwise I would point. Yeah, it all looks pretty common. Now, what is somewhat concerning to me is looking ahead in this space. We have those are not engine oil coolers. That is the coolers for the DME as well as the turbo. To me, it seems pretty exposed. Yes, I know these fins are angled in such a way that most debris will not make it into that space, but I am going to place some mesh in that space, between those spaces, to make sure that those are fully protected. Same is true on this side. These are fully exposed, and I'm not really crazy about that. Will I do monoballs here in the place of the hydro bushing? I might at some point, but not right out of the gate. Or I might do polyurethane or something later on, maybe one of those style of bushings. But now the other thing that they've changed is the engine oil cooler, which was exposed. It was right here. And that's a big problem on the F90 M5, parked to my right. That vehicle has the exposed engine oil cooler. The aftermarket has stepped forward to make sure that you can get engine oil cooler guards. There's a few different choices on the market, but they've actually moved it. And the problem I have right now is I can't see it with the covers in place, but we're going to get into that. We're going to take the panels off, have a look in just a moment. I did make an effort to get eyes on the revised oil cooler by removing this panel. Unfortunately, this entire area is encapsulated in black plastic. It's really in an enclosure if you think about it, because they want as much air as possible passing through the shutters, both above and below, and through the radiators and through the engine oil cooler. Again, I can't get eyes on the revised engine oil cooler. I will include that in a later video. Considering we were just talking about the oil cooler and that we're at the front of the vehicle, we should talk about the grille design, airflow, and air management. Now, this is a dual shutter arrangement, meaning there are 2 shutter systems on the front of this vehicle, upper and lower. Take note that the shutters on top are vertical and the shutters at the bottom are horizontal. Thus, they are independently controlled and actuated. I have yet to see the shutters open on this vehicle since taking delivery, and that includes during the transport drive, which was all highway miles. The vehicle apparently did not get warm enough to necessitate opening those. I don't know the ISTA Plus command, nor do I have a scan tool that will perform that operation. However, when I determine how to do that, I will provide that information in a future video. Let's take a quick look at the outboard air duct on the driver's side, for which there is a matching duct on the passenger side. These feed air into the turbo and DME coolers. These are the outboard coolers, not to be confused with the charge intake cooler, which sits atop the engine. This duct only feeds this cooler on each side of the vehicle. Let's walk around and have a quick look inside the wheel well. This is the vent and backside of the outboard coolers, and this is the brake cooling duct. However, the brake cooling duct is not fed from the same air duct. We'll walk back around. Off camera, I placed an LED light in the brake cooling duct, and we can see just a glint of light through the horizontal shutters. The point being that unless the shutters are open, your brakes are not receiving air from those ducts. And again, I don't know what the criteria is for the horizontal ducts to be open. I doubt that they're looking at brake temperatures or anything like that. It's probably solely on engine temperature or transmission or oil cooler temperature, but your brakes are not receiving supplemental air through that port unless the shutters are open. Let's take a look at the outboard air ducts. These are vertical and they're on the outer edge of the front fascia. I do not understand the purpose of these other than to provide additional air into the wheel well, but it would not be for brake cooling. This vertical slot here is where that air passes through. But again, you're not really cooling the brakes or anything. This isn't F1 technology. It's not like they're trying to stall the front splitter or something silly like that. But nevertheless, the vertical ducts on the front of the vehicle are feeding this area here, and that air passes across the front of the wheel. To wrap up discussions about the front fascia, there is something worthy of mention and something that I think is clever. There are two covers. This one's on the driver's side. It is fixed. It doesn't move. However, on the passenger side, this is the mounting position for the tow hook. And I have the cover removed, obviously, but it's a mirror of the other side. It snaps into place and can be easily removed for mounting of the tow hook. That is a nice feature, as most vehicles today have a body-colored front fascia cutout, which is oftentimes damaged if the vehicle does have to be winched onto a rollback. This is a much cleaner design, and even if this cover is removed and lost by the rollback operator, it can be easily replaced. Let's take a few moments and talk about the brake system. The brakes on this vehicle are absolutely horrible. Yes, I said horrible. Be aware, I'm in no way comparing the brakes on the M340i to the F90 M5. Those are 6-piston front calipers, single rear piston calipers, and it is like the hand of God when you apply the brakes. The deceleration is staggering. I don't expect anything near that from this vehicle, but I do expect it to stop. And granted, this is a new vehicle. The pads and the rotors are not completely bedded in yet, but I can already tell this is going to be an unsatisfactory situation. I really think the front calipers are decorative for the most part at this point. Yes, they're 4-piston, and the problem is really in what BMW has done starting back in about 2013 with the F30 chassis. In that era of time, they started equipping vehicles with the ceramic brake pads, which are low dusting, and Mercedes-Benz has done it, Audi's done it, and it's just terrible. I can't stand it. What I will do here is install a set of higher friction pads. I don't care about the dust. I really want to be able to go deep into the corners. I want grabby brakes, brakes that are very high in the pedal, and this is not it. I had to do the same thing on our F33 series. We have two in the family, and I immediately, after driving those vehicles, I removed the brake pads and installed the pads from like the older E90 series, which are, you know, they're not full metallic, they're not track pads or anything. They provide a higher coefficient of friction, and they work much, much better. I'll tell you who also noticed was my wife, and my wife's not a car person per se, but after driving a couple of F30s, she was like, yeah, what happened to the brakes? The brakes are terrible. And I would concur the same situation is true here with the M340i. I like the look. These are good. They're sourced from Brembo, but they have the wrong pads, and I'm going to correct that. Okay, so that concludes part one, if you will, of the Hoist review. I'm going to remove the undercovers and expose all the mechanicals, and we'll get into that. I didn't show things from this side, but you can see the connector for the adaptive suspension there on the front struts. I'll show the one on this side as well. Okay, we'll take the next step and pick up from here. Once again, we're going to review the underside of the vehicle, starting at the rear, moving to the front. However, this time a number of the undercovers have been removed. Some of those are on the floor there at left, and I have one here at the rear of the vehicle as well. I did not remove all of the undercovers simply because there's not that much to see in some of those spaces. I've really focused on what I think people would like to see, as well as things that I'm curious about. So let's get started. First up is this small cover at the rear of the vehicle. It's held in place with 7 10mm fasteners. BMW has switched from 8mm to 10mm, for those of you that are unaware, on all of their underbody fasteners, and that is in line with what Mercedes-Benz is doing as well. Now that small cover really just bridges this gap from the exhaust heat shield over to the rear splitter, and inside we really don't have much to see. There's the rear bumper structure, there's some wiring. That small white tab that was hanging down, that's actually on that wire. I've since secured that, tucked that away, but yeah, there's not a lot to see here, but I wanted to show it nevertheless. Now we're going to move forward, and I will show this, just, I don't know if I can get light in here, or the camera, get the lens. That's the top edge, or the saddle portion of the fuel tank. There is no longer a parking brake cable in that space, or a clip to fail, because it's now electronic. Sorry for holding the light in front of the camera, but nevertheless, that's kind of how that is designed. And we will now move forward. We will now pick up where I left off, and we're going to start on the floor with the undercovers. First of all, this aluminum cover goes underneath the engine, the front differential, as well as the steering rack. The black cover, this next one, that is the forwardmost cover. We'll talk about the black box momentarily. That is the transmission cover, and that's pretty obvious. That covers kind of the back portion of the engine, as well as the drain plug for the oil. Over on the right, we've got this small black plastic cover. You'll see it's missing from here. It's actually the motor mount cover, which is interesting. So they have individual covers for these. I left this one on because it's the same thing. But let's get back to this little black box. This is actually a vehicle sound generator, and it's something you find on EVs nowadays. Well, this is not an EV. This is not a plug-in hybrid. It's merely a B58 equipped combustion engine vehicle with a mild hybrid. So I don't know why they feel the need to generate sound on a vehicle like this. It's probably not BMW. It's probably the federal government, some regulation that states anything that's electrified, even partially, has to have something like this. Let's flip this over. And I could see the speaker grill before underneath the vehicle, but I wasn't sure if there was actually something behind this, and there in fact is. So that little box retails for just over $100, and it's on this vehicle, which is quite surprising. So now let's go up top and have a look at the good stuff. Again, this is the transfer case, and this is the brace for the transfer case. And if you move forward here, we're into the ZF 8HP transmission. However, this is not an 8HP as you would normally see. This is the mild hybrid form. And this right here, you can see this purplish wire that comes in. Well, that's visible on top of the motor, and I'm fairly certain that this is the 12 volt to 48 volt converter, DC to DC converter. Yeah, it's a very different look from a normal 8 HP. All of this is normally a plastic pan and integrated filter. Now the pan is much smaller, but the design is more or less the same. Now, where is the fill plug? This is the drain plug. That's pretty obvious. The fill plug is actually right there. I've got the light on it. So that's where they put the fill plug. Usually the fill plug is on the side. You have to remove one of those covers, or one of those supports, I should say. I don't know the actual model designation. This is an 8 HP, as is that an 8 HP. The difference being that there's a different suffix on this mild hybrid variety. In terms of the electric drive unit and the integrated clutch packs, that's located right here in the forward portion of the transmission case, and that's directly behind the flywheel. Again, this is the B58 Gen 3 or B58TU2 engine, mated to the latest iteration of the ZF 8 HP transmission with 48 volt mild hybrid. Let's move on forward of the transmission. Again, we get a little bit better look at the factory downpipe. And then we've got the drain plug right here, oil drain plug. We've got the cover for the driver's side motor mount. And on this side, we've got the cover removed for the passenger side. Let's take a look in this open space on the driver's side of the engine. This is opposite the turbo and the downpipe, and I am using a couple of light bars, so please excuse the obstruction. This is the drive shaft coming forward off of the transfer case into the front differential. Here we have a valve body, which is actually on the front of the transmission, and the lines here and here, which I'm touching, those go forward to the transmission cooler, which is sandwiched either in between or in front of the radiator and the engine oil cooler. Here up top, we have this sandwich plate that is a heat exchanger that is just behind or just beneath the oil filter housing, which is out of sight, but it is just above that. And then we have this interesting isolator here, and I call it an isolator because it is a mounting bracket for the motor mount, and it has urethane as shown there in blue. The other interesting part of this is we have this, again, another violet colored wire that is grounded to the chassis, and that goes back to the transmission as I'm following it with the light here. And let's take a look at this rigid line. Now this line right here that I'm tapping on, that is also coming from the transmission, and the bracket is what interests me. There is a bolt into the chassis on the top of that bracket, but down below we have a hole with no fastener. The bracket itself is fused to that line, so there's no problem that that's going to get away or come unsecured, but it is rather interesting that the bracket does not have a bolt on the bottoms. There's no hole in the chassis or no provision for that. Again, sorry for the light bar, but this is the best I can do in this confined space. So those are most of the things of interest that we can see with the camera, or at least get into this space. The heat management module, which is a known point of failure on these vehicles, that is well out of sight. It's up behind the front of the engine beneath the intake. So I would like to get eyes on that, but it's really not possible, not from this perspective. We're now looking at the bottom of the front differential. Got the drain plug right there, axles coming out on both sides. And if you can see this black fibrous material they have all over the engine, it's quite common these days. The B48 has it, the B58 has it, the N20, N26 had a little bit, but one of the problems that BMW has had with this is on some models of vehicles, not this one and not this engine, they've had actual leaks of either oil and or coolant. This becomes soaked, and then they get into electrical issues and just shorting of the electrical system. But that is a thing. I understand why they do it, because they are intending to reduce NVH and engine noise and everything. That is a problem with engine coverings such as this. We'll see where that goes in the future. Here is the electric steering rack. And this is the business end. This is the motor unit. Again, we've got this subframe that is galvanized. It looks like a chain link fence to me. And I'm not concerned about it corroding or corrosion rusting or anything like that. I just wonder why they did not coat this, why it's not painted, and I'm not sure. Maybe someone out there knows the answer. Now I've got this forward cover off, and unfortunately we're looking at black plastic. This is a single fan unit, even with the high performance cooling package. Again, the coolers outboard here, those have coolant flowing through them, and they are normally on other models there for the DME as well as the turbo. Now, what about the engine oil cooler? Well, it was, or at least on the F10 M5 and the F90 M5, the oil cooler lays down like this black piece of plastic. So it's horizontal, it's laying flat, it's exposed from the bottom. But on this model, they've actually moved it. And I've traced the lines such that it's somewhere in here or possibly in here, just behind the radiator. So they've placed it in a vertical orientation. We can't see it because of the shutters on the grill. Otherwise, I get a good look at it. But I'm going to show the cooler lines right now. So this line is carrying coolant. This line actually goes to the outboard coolers here and here. And then right up there, and I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm not sure how far the camera will show, but there are two black lines coming out of a coupling on the side of the engine block, and that is the engine oil cooler lines. They come right here where my fingers are. One goes to the left, one goes to the right. I've traced the lines all the way. They don't go to the corners of the vehicle. They only go in just above that hose on this side. And then over here, where's the other line? There it is. So if I follow that all the way with my hand, you can't see me touching it, but it's effectively going into that space and into the cooler on either side. This pigtail here, that is the connector for the vehicle sound generator. Again, I still don't understand why they're doing that on this model of vehicle, but it's probably a government regulation. Again, I think this is a really good perspective with all the covers removed. Still don't understand the galvanized engine cradle, forward structure. Really like the looks of the new ZF8HP. I'm sure I'll be doing service on that in the future. The wheels have been removed from the vehicle. Please ignore the blue painter's tape. Again, the vehicle is undergoing paint correction, ceramic coating, and PPF. We're going to do a couple of things. First, we'll start with the wheels, and this is the summer offset wheel and tire package. The tires are 19-inch Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's, the same tire, although in a different size, found on this F90 M5 competition. And we have 225 40s in front and 255 35s in the rear. The wheels are the 995M bicolor style, and this is the only wheel available with this package at this time. I'm going to weigh the fronts and the rears. It's going to be a bit of a balancing act. I will pause the camera and do what I can to hold the wheel and tire in place on the scale. This is not a very expensive scale, so don't expect precision, but it should give an idea of what these weigh, a good basis for those considering aftermarket options. We're going to start by weighing the front wheel and tire. I'll now roll this onto the scale, balance it with my finger. We're showing 56.2 pounds for the front wheel and tire. Next up, we're going to weigh the rear wheel and tire. Getting it up on the scale, balancing it, showing 58.2 pounds. Once again, that was not an accurate weigh-in. However, it demonstrated roughly a 2-pound difference between the front wheel and tire and the rear wheel and tire on this vehicle. These are cast wheels. They're extremely heavy. For those of you looking at aftermarket alternatives, there are several forged options in the aftermarket that will save several pounds on each corner of the vehicle. Now that we have taken a closer look at the summer offset wheel and tire package, we've weighed the fronts, we've weighed the rears, we've compared the two. We should also take a closer look at the suspension and the brake hardware with the wheels removed from the vehicle. Earlier in the video, I was extremely critical of the brake system. I stand by those statements. However, I should also clarify that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the brake hardware other than the brake pads that are equipped on the vehicle. These are a low dusting compound and they're not to my satisfaction, so they're going to be changed out very quickly. First up, we have the Brembo sourced brake calipers. 4-piston. The rotors measure in at 374 millimeters by 36 millimeters in thickness. They're not a pure pin design per se. This is an aluminum hat, steel rotor, and they're connected by what looks like rivets or pins, but they're not the pure M rotor. And I'm going to spin around here and take a quick look on the M5. That is a pure pin style rotor. Again, I am doing an apples to oranges comparison. I am well aware of that. What I'm trying to convey is that if you're looking at this M Performance model or other M Performance models in the BMW lineup, you're not getting pure M hardware on those vehicles. You're getting something in between. This is not a one-piece rotor as you find on the 330i or the 320i or 330e. This is kind of an in-between, and that's fine. It is, again, an in-between vehicle, but this is an aluminum hat, steel rotor, and it's quite beefy. So it is a nice piece of hardware. It's just not the full M treatment. Okay, next up, let's talk about the active suspension. I like the connector being in this position. It's much better than having the dongle on top of the McPherson strut or on top of the strut itself, because when you take these out either for replacement or you're putting lowering springs in or coilovers or whatever you're doing to the vehicle, it's very easy to damage that wire that sticks out of the stem. This is much nicer having this on the side of the body itself. And these are manufactured by Monroe for those that are curious. In terms of the suspension, again, just a quick review. Sway bar, it goes above the subframe and the bushings are shown there. I think those are glued in place if they're like the F30s. We have the thrust arm or the upper control arm, whichever you want to call it. The hydro bushing is located here. Tie rod. This is the link for the sway bar. And what are we missing? Oh, lower control arm here. It's a 2-link setup as you'll find on any other 3 Series. As we did at the front of the vehicle with the wheels removed, let's take a quick look at the rear brake hardware as well as the rear suspension. Let's start with the suspension. Again, I would like to see BMW get away from stamped steel control arms as well as the steel rear carrier. Why not go back to forged steel, or better yet, let's move to the aluminum intensive suspension that we see at the front of the vehicle. That would be a good thing. Fingers crossed they'll do that at some point in the future. With regard to the brakes, let's look at the rotors first. It is, again, a 2-piece design. These are not quite as beefy. They are 345 millimeters in diameter by 24 millimeters. And in terms of the rear calipers, this is much what you find on the F90 M5 competition behind me. It's unfortunate that they use this design because on the F30s, those M products had the style of caliper where you could remove the brake pads without removing the caliper, but they've gone to this. And granted, the F30 was a manual rear parking brake. This is an electronic parking brake, and that module is right there for those that are unfamiliar. And when it comes time to do service on that, it will require one of 2 things: either ISTA to electronically back off the piston so you can do service on the brakes, or you'll need an adapter set. I don't know which one this is. I haven't worked on the G20 rear brakes yet, but I'm sure that's coming at some point. Just something to be aware of, either an adapter set or ISTA software. Let's take a quick look at the adaptive suspension. Again, we have the connector on the side of the shock body, which is much, much better than having it at the top where you have to fish the wire loom out when doing service. Again, whether you're doing maybe lowering springs or making an alteration or even just basic maintenance in the future, this is a much nicer setup. And per the label, the rear shocks are also manufactured by Monroe. So we're going to move ahead and look at a couple of things in the trunk as well as under the hood. And now let's take a brief look in the trunk space, focusing on the battery. Be aware that BMW has removed the pull tab from this carpeted subfloor, thus you will need a plastic wedge tool or similar to get under this. Beneath, we find BMW's oversized 12-volt AGM battery or abstracted glass matte battery. This is the primary battery for the vehicle, not to be confused with the 48-volt mild hybrid battery located under the hood on the passenger side. We'll take a look at that in a few minutes. However, this is the primary battery for the vehicle, and it's what's found in BMWs over the last 3 or 4 decades. Now, this is not what you find in a pure M model. Those vehicles have lithium-ion batteries, which are smaller, they're lighter, it's a premium battery, and unfortunately, we don't get the lithium-ion battery in M performance vehicles such as this M340i xDrive. Under the hood, looking at the engine, BMW giveth and they taketh away. If you look at the engine cover on the B58 Gen 3, they removed the M performance logos on this side. You do not get M logos of any kind unless you get the 4 Series Grand Coupe, in which it has an M badge up front. I'm sure many people will spend great amounts of trouble and money to get those engine covers. I'm not really concerned. And I'll pause the video and pull the engine cover off. Once again, with the engine cover removed, this is the B58 Gen 3, aka B58TU2. There's also a nice engine code associated with that, and I forget what the ending suffix is, but we're not real concerned with that right now. I want to show the engine in its clean state, and we'll do a pan around and look at a few things. This is, again, the engine that has both direct injection as well as port fuel injection. This violet cable, again, we saw the connection on the bottom at the transmission. That's for the 48-volt mild hybrid system. And like all BMW turbo engines, it has split cooling circuits. The larger tank is for the engine block heater core. The smaller tank is for the turbo and the DME. And I'm sure I'll get into this in 2 years' time when it needs to be flushed. As well as looking over on this side, we have the hybrid battery. I'll take this cover off later and get a closer look, but that is effectively it in its hiding spot. And through the magic of video, I have removed the cover from the 48-volt mild hybrid battery. And here it is. I'll do a downward shot. See if I can stay out of the shadows here. See the connector, it is lithium ion. It's not very big, but that's what we're talking about with the newest of the 48-volt hybrid batteries, where it's mounted and what it looks like. I'm sure there's a little more to it than what I'm showing. And there in the corner is the violet colored cable. In this space we have the turbo and the exhaust, the downpipe, etc. Let's swing around to this side, avoiding the light bar, and have a look at one of the challenge areas of the B48, B58 modular engine family, trying to avoid shadows here. This is the oil filter housing. This is the actual cap, and as you can see, it's obscured by this violet colored 48-volt mild hybrid cable, which is semi-rigid. So this cable is in the way. Aside from that, the placement of this oil filter housing, it proves to be difficult. We have a B48 and I have to move a number of things out of the way to get to it. But aside from oil changes, the oil filter housing gasket will fail somewhere in the life of the vehicle. Hopefully much later on, but they always leak, they always fail. It's a plastic housing on aluminum. It eventually gives way to an oil leak. With this modular engine family, they've flipped the engine, putting the timing chain against the firewall. That in turn has moved the oil filter housing from the front to the rear, and that's what we have to live with. These engines have proven to be extremely reliable, and of course this is the Gen 3 variant, so we'll see how this one fares. Okay folks, I am doing this part of the video as a voiceover. The camera will be placed in the space or the gap between the passenger side strut tower and the exhaust side of the engine block. I want to show some of the mechanicals in this space. This is not a mechanical deep dive on the B58TU2 or anything like that. In fact, as of the making of this video, there is no technical documentation on this engine, and that's kind of strange in that the engine has been out for 2 years, although not in this platform. It was previously in the 7 Series as well as the X7 and possibly one other platform, but suffice to say, we're not doing a deep dive. We're just going to take a look at some of the things in this space. And I also was unable to do this as one continuous flow. We're going to move the video forward. We'll freeze frame in different places. I'll speak to what we're looking at and we'll move on. Let's get started. First of all, we're going to take a look at the turbocharger, and it is from a company called BMTS. BMTS, for those unaware, is Bosch Mayhill, and it was originally a partnership that was sold to a super conglomerate, and now it's a standalone company. This is not a brand that is familiar to me. Now, on my F90 M5 competition, I have Garrett turbos from the factory. There are lots of other known name brands, but BMTS is not one that really stands out. If you look at the part numbers and you try to do any type of cross-reference with either the BMW part number or you're looking at the manufacturer's part number, there's not a lot of information out there. Furthermore, if you're looking at this turbocharger and you're thinking, well, it's the same one that was on the original B58TU2 in the other platforms I mentioned, that's not actually true. They have changed the part numbers on these. The BMW part number changed, as well as the manufacturer, the BMTS number. There must be something slightly different with this turbocharger versus the one that was on prior iterations of the B58TU2. And again, the engine's only been out for 2 years, so who knows, it must have been something minor. Now let's take a look at the stainless steel lines that are entering the top of the turbocharger, or the center core there between the hot and cold side. There's 3 showing. There's actually another stainless steel line on the bottom of the turbocharger. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Let's identify these on top. The 2 that are against the engine block, those are carrying coolant. The one that's closest to the engine block, that is the return line. There's actually an auxiliary pump on the end of that one towards the front of the engine. And then the next line out from the engine block, that is the incoming line. So again, those are carrying coolant. The line that you see that looks kind of like a horseshoe and it goes down and underneath the turbo, that is actually carrying oil. So that's the oil supply line coming into the turbocharger. And the line on the bottom is actually the drain or the return line that goes into the crankcase, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment as well. Also shown here in the black plastic, which is kind of in the lower right portion of the frame, that is the wastegate controller. We're going to get an up close and personal look at that just in a moment. So we'll roll the video forward now. Okay, the first thing that you see as we move the camera down into this space is the wastegate controller, and then below that is the cold air intake for the turbo itself, right in the center of the frame. We move down a little bit further and we're looking at the blow-off valve, and then we're going to move down a little bit further, freeze the video again, and that is the charge pipe that we're looking at, so with the metal clip in the upper portion of this frame. So now we have a look at the bottom of the engine block, passenger side lower portion. We've got 2 lines. The braided line that is to the upper left corner, that is the oil supply line to the turbo. And then the one that's ribbed and it goes back down to the engine block, that is the return line that goes into the crankcase. That concludes that part of it. Now as we move over a little bit, we can start to see some other components that we'll get an even better look at in just a moment. First of all, the camera is more or less bottomed out on top of the electric power steering rack. And then just to the left of that is the axle shaft housing that comes out of the front differential. Those are the items we're looking at there. And to the hard left at about the 9 o'clock position, we have the motor mount bracket. It's not the motor mount, it's the bracket, and that's multiple pieces. We'll get a closer look at that in just a little bit. We will now pan up, taking a look at the turbine or hot side on the left, the rotor at the center, and the compressor or cold side on the right. Let's roll the video forward. Okay, I mentioned the integrated exhaust manifold, and we'll pan to the left in just a moment and get a closer look at things. But this is not 6 ports on the side of the engine block as you would expect to see on prior iterations of the B58 engines. This is a 6-into-2, so 3 at the front, 3 at the rear, and the turbocharger hot side is arranged accordingly. Let's roll the video forward. We're panning backwards here. We'll pause, take notice of how bright the copper is on the securing nuts for the turbo manifold. They almost looked anodized, they almost look fake, but in a short amount of time they will turn and they will no longer be bright. Let's keep going, and we're gonna come up and I'm gonna freeze the video right there. Okay, we're now looking at the upper left quadrant of the video frame, or about the 11 o'clock position. Again, this is the rear portion of the integrated exhaust manifold. So we've seen the front, now we've seen the rear, and we're also just above and kind of getting a look at the newly designed downpipe for the B58TU2, which is different. It's very different from the downpipes on prior iterations of this engine. We pan rather quickly down past the downpipe, and we're looking at the motor mounts on the lower left corner of the frame, and we're also looking at the motor mount bracket. And take note, there's a couple things going on here. You've got the rubber motor mount itself. It's an aluminum/rubber mount, and then above that is the bracket that affixes to the engine block. But take note that metal plate that's on top of this aluminum bracket. You've got aluminum, rubber, aluminum, and then you're into a steel, kind of a wraparound plate. And I'm wondering why they did that. Is that for rigidity, or does it provide some type of dampening? It's just interesting to see that they've gone with a helper plate or a helper bracket on top of the aluminum bracket. I don't think it does anything more than what we're seeing here, but it is kind of interesting. Roll the video forward. Okay, we're now at the rearmost portion of this gap between the strut tower and the engine itself, and I've taken the GoPro as close to the firewall as I can, but we're looking forward now, so you're getting a good look on the left. Almost half of this frame that we're looking at is the downpipe, and you can see the O2 sensors there. You can also see just almost all the way to the front. Looking again at the electric power steering unit, moving forward to that, you can see the anti-roll bar bracket. So in the roll bar running across the top of the engine cradle or the front structure. Let's roll the video forward again. And now I've spun the camera around and we're facing the firewall effectively. We're looking at the top edge of the downpipe and the heat shielding and a number of hoses, which I would love to identify, but have not been able to do that. I'll do that on a future video. Okay, this is one of the better side profile shots of the downpipe that we're going to get, and it's kind of tight in here to get the camera and get the angle and everything. But you know, one of the things I want to point out is, aside from having dual O2 sensors, which the prior downpipe had, this downpipe, aside from being a different shape and having this kind of rectangular compartment in the middle or chamber, and if you look at the 12 o'clock position in this frame, these are air tubes, or AIR tubes as they were called many years ago. I don't know what they're called now, but they're sampling the exhaust as it passes through the downpipe. That is the major difference between this downpipe and prior generations of the downpipe. This is not a continuous circular pipe. Again, it's a different shape, and it has 2 additional sampling sensors on it. The aftermarket is still playing catch up. If you're looking for a catted aftermarket downpipe for this vehicle, as of this writing, there's only one company that's doing it. The others are still playing catch up, and I know they're working to develop downpipes and their respective brands, and there's only one on the market. Others will follow. Pausing the video here one more time, we're looking at the top of the front axle on the passenger side at the very bottom of the frame. Moving forward again, the electric power steering unit, and then forward to the anti-roll bar bracket. We're looking at the radiator at this point, or at least the back side of the radiator and the coolers that are in this space, and the black plastic line that's in the lower center portion of this frame. That is the oil cooler line or the transmission cooler line. I'm not sure which, and I've not been able to confirm which cooler this is, but that is one of the lines for one of those systems. Whipping around here, just taking a one last look, and we'll move ahead. As a general rule, the first operation that I always perform when taking delivery of a new vehicle is to change the oil and filter. You should always get the factory fill oil out of the system as quickly as possible. And there's no better example than what is going on at Toyota with the Tacoma pickup recall, which involves replacement of over 100,000 engines due to metal shavings in the manufacturing process. It's just common sense. Oil is inexpensive, engines are expensive. Don't be one of those people that runs the oil for the entire service interval and it only depends on the dealer to change the oil and those kinds of things. Give yourself confidence knowing that the engine has fresh oil and a fresh filter. As shown, I am currently doing the first oil change on this new M340i xDrive with 200 miles on the odometer. Two things that I found of concern while doing this is a drain plug that was not torqued. It was almost finger tight, and it was also missing the copper crush washer. This is not something you want to find, and of course the drain plug could have easily backed itself out, and or I would have had an oil leak and would not have known anything about this, potentially even having an engine failure. This is not something you see too often, and you want to check into this immediately after taking delivery of a vehicle. To conclude the in-depth hoist review on this 2025 BMW G20 M340i xDrive LCI2, and yes, that is a mouthful, the intent of this video has been to provide an open and honest review and perspective on the mechanicals of the M340i xDrive. In doing so, we've looked extensively at the underside of the vehicle, having removed a number of the undercovers. We've looked under the hood, in the trunk, in the battery space, the wheels and tires, and we've also done some loose comparisons with M products. From my perspective, the G20 M340i xDrive is the best vehicle in BMW's current model line, and the question is, will it continue into the next generation? This vehicle is supposed to be built through the 2026 model year, concluding production in February of 2026. We'll see what BMW has in store for the future. Obviously, with electrification and hybrid technology, what this vehicle is in the future could be very different. I'm hoping that it doesn't succumb to what's going to happen with the M5. The new G90 M5, unfortunately, is a plug-in hybrid, and as such, it now weighs 1,135 pounds more than the vehicle sitting in my garage. And that is very unfortunate. We don't want to see something like that happen with the M340i, but we'll see what BMW has in store for the future and if this model will continue. As stated at the beginning of this video, there will be additional videos on this vehicle, which will focus on tuning, modifications, and other mechanical topics. If you have questions or comments about the contents of the video, please reach out via email and I will do my best to respond. And as always, I hope this video has been helpful.